Barefoot angels. The wrench slipped from Jack Brennan's grip and hit the concrete floor with a sharp ringing clang that echoed through the garage like a warning bell. In 23 years of running the Iron Wings garage on the east side of Cedar Falls, Texas, Jack Brennan had never dropped a tool. Not once. His hands were steady as stone always had been, even when the rest of the world was falling apart around him. He could rebuild a carburetor in the dark. He could thread a needle-thin fuel line with fingers thick as sausages. He could strip a transmission down to its bones and put it back together without glancing at a manual. His hands did not shake. His hands did not slip. They were the one thing about himself he had always been able to trust. But the girl made him drop it. She stood in the open bay door like something out of a fever dream. 7 years old, maybe less, maybe more. Hard to tell with children who had seen too much. She wore a pink dress torn at the shoulder, hanging off her tiny frame like a flag after a storm. No shoes. Her feet were raw and bleeding, leaving small red prints on the oil-stained concrete as she swayed in the doorway. She had run a long way. That much was obvious. Her chest heaved. Her legs trembled. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears that had dried and been replaced by fresh ones, layer upon layer, like rings inside a tree that told a story of seasons gone wrong. But it was her eyes that stopped Jack cold. Those were not the eyes of a 7-year-old. Those were the eyes of someone who had looked through a window and seen something that could never be unseen. Something that had reached inside her and rearranged the order of things so that childhood was on one side of a line and everything after was on the other. He had seen eyes like that before. In the mirror decades ago, the morning after his father left. In the faces of the veterans who wandered into his garage looking for a reason to keep breathing. Eyes that said the world had broken its promise. She opened her mouth. "He hurt my grandma." The words ripped through the garage like a gunshot. Every engine died. Every wrench stopped turning. Every conversation cut off mid-sentence. 15 bikers in leather vests turned toward the tiny figure swaying in the light. The afternoon sun behind her made her silhouette glow, and for one strange, suspended moment, she looked almost holy. A small, bleeding angel standing in the doorway of a place that bore wings on its name. Jack was already moving. "What did you say, sweetheart?" The girl's chest heaved again. A sigh tore out of her, raw and ragged, the kind of sound that comes from a place deeper than the lungs. "Please, please, you have to help her. There's a man, he's hurting her. I ran and—" Her knees buckled. Jack caught her before she hit the ground. She weighed nothing. Weighed bones and fear wrapped in torn pink fabric. He lowered himself to one knee, the cold concrete pressing through his jeans, and held her steady with hands that could bend steel but were gentle enough now to cradle a sparrow. "Easy now, easy. What's your name?" "Rosie." Her voice cracked like thin ice. "Rosie Callahan." "Okay, Rosie Callahan, I'm Jack. Can you tell me where your grandma is?" "Cedar Street, the yellow house with the roses out front." "Please, mister, he was so big and she was screaming and I didn't know what to do, so I ran because Grandma always said if something bad happens, find the angels. Find the men with the wings on their backs." Jack's blood went cold. He looked over his shoulder. 14 men stood in a half circle behind him, their leather vests catching the afternoon light. The iron wing patches across their backs seemed to glow in the sun slanting through the bay doors. Each patch was hand-sewn, a tradition that went back to the club's founding. Wings spread wide, feathers sharp as blades stitched in silver thread on black leather. The symbol of protection, the symbol of a promise made to strangers. She had come looking for them, specifically, deliberately, because someone had told her to, someone who knew what those wings meant. "You did exactly right, Rosie." His voice was calm, but his eyes were anything but. He looked up. "Spike call 911. Possible assault in progress. Cedar Street. Bear, Colt, Flint, you're with me. The rest of you gear up. If this is what I think it is, we might need everybody." The garage exploded into controlled chaos. Engines roaring to life. Boots pounding concrete. The synchronized thunder of Harleys warming up filled the air like war drums. Men who had been joking and drinking coffee 30 seconds ago were now moving with a purpose that transformed them. This was what the Iron Wings did. This was the switch that flipped when someone needed help. Jack set Rosie gently on a workbench near the back. A heavy-set woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked braids emerged from the office. Mama June. She had been the club's den mother for 30 years, seen everything, feared nothing. She had held dying men and comforted grieving widows, and once talked a prospect out of eating his own gun, and at 2 in the morning. Nothing rattled her. "Come here, baby girl." Mama June wrapped Rosie in her arms, surrounding the child with warmth and softness, and the faint smell of lavender soap. "You're safe now. Nobody's gonna hurt you here." But Rosie grabbed Jack's vest with both fists. Her grip was surprisingly strong for a child her size, like she was holding onto the edge of a cliff. "Promise me." Her eyes burned into his. "Promise me you'll save her. She's all I have. My mom's gone. My dad's been gone forever. It's just me and Grandma. Please, please don't let him hurt her anymore." Something cracked inside Jack's chest. Something he thought had calcified years ago, walled off behind concrete and scar tissue, and 2 decades of telling himself that caring too much about anything was a luxury he could not afford. "I promise," he said. He covered her small hands with his massive calloused ones. "Nobody hurts your grandma while the Iron Wings ride. Nobody." He pulled away, but Rosie held on for one more second. "She's stronger than she looks," the girl whispered. And there was something in the way she said it. Not a child's blind faith in a grandmother's invincibility. Something else. Something that sounded almost like a warning. "So am I, sweetheart. So am I." 30 seconds later, 4 motorcycles screamed out of the garage and into the Texas heat. Deep, guttural, angry. The kind of sound that made people on sidewalks stop and stare. The kind of sound that made smart people step out of the way. The kind of sound that said something was wrong and someone was going to answer for it. Cedar Street was 6 blocks east. They made it in 90 seconds, weaving through traffic, running 2 stop signs, the engines howling loud enough to rattle windows in every house they passed. Jack spotted the yellow house immediately. It sat on a corner lot set back from the street behind a white picket fence that had been carefully maintained. The white roses in the front yard still bloomed despite the August heat, a stubborn splash of beauty that seemed to mock whatever violence had invaded. Jack noticed the garden was immaculate, not a weed in sight. Whoever lived here loved this place, had spent years tending it, shaping it, making it beautiful. But the front door was destroyed, not kicked in, kicked out. The wood was splintered outward, hanging from one hinge like a broken wing. That detail nagged at Jack. A door kicked out meant the force had come from inside. Someone inside had thrown someone else through that door. Or someone inside had been strong enough to send an attacker backward through solid oak. Jack raised his fist. The bikes went silent. In the sudden quiet, they could hear something from inside the house. Humming. Someone was humming a lullaby. The melody was soft and sweet and completely impossibly wrong in the context of a shattered door and a child's desperate plea for help. "What in God's name?" Bear whispered. He was a mountain of a man, 6'3", 240, with a beard that reached his chest and hands like catcher's mitts. His real name was Danny, but nobody had called him that in 15 years. He had served 2 tours overseas and come home with a Purple Heart and a drinking problem. The Iron Wings had given him a family and a reason to stay sober. He was Jack's best friend and his right hand, and right now he looked confused, which was not something Bear did often. Jack drew his knife. Not because he planned to use it, but because walking into an unknown situation without a blade was suicide in his experience. He approached the ruined door slowly, every sense sharpened. The smell of gun oil on his hands gave way to the scent of roses from the garden and something else underneath it. Blood. Fresh blood. The living room looked like a war zone. Furniture overturned. A ceramic lamp shattered against the wall, its shade crumpled like a crushed hat. Picture frames scattered across the hardwood like fallen soldiers. A bookshelf had toppled, spilling decades of novels and photo albums across the floor. A vase of roses had exploded against the mantel, and water was still dripping slowly onto the floor, mixing with something darker. There were scuff marks on the hardwood. Deep ones, the kind made by boots digging in during a struggle. This had not been a quick assault. This had been a fight. And there in the middle of it all sat an elderly woman in a floral armchair. She was tiny, could not have been more than 5'2". Silver hair pulled back in a neat bun that was only slightly loosened from whatever had happened. Reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She wore a cardigan the color of cream over a blue cotton dress, and her posture was perfect. Ramrod straight, military straight, Jack would later realize. She looked like she belonged on the cover of a magazine about grandmothers who bake cookies and knit blankets for church fundraisers, except for the unconscious man crumpled at her feet. He was huge, 6'4", at least 250 pounds easy, the kind of man who made other men cross the street. His nose was clearly broken, flattened sideways in a way that would require surgical repair. His left arm was bent at an angle that made Jack wince, the elbow joint dislocated or worse. A bruise was already forming around his throat in the shape of a forearm, and he was not moving. His chest rose and fell in shallow, wheezing breaths, but he was out cold. The old woman looked up from her humming and smiled. Not a nervous smile, not a relieved smile, a calm, measured smile, the smile of a woman who had been interrupted during an otherwise pleasant afternoon. "Oh, good, the cavalry has arrived." She gestured to the man on the floor with one delicate hand. "Would someone mind taking out the trash? He's bleeding on my carpet." Jack stared. His brain struggled to connect what he was seeing with what he had expected to find. He had come prepared for a rescue, had braced himself for a beaten woman, a crying victim, a scene of helpless suffering. What he found instead was a scene that made no logical sense. An elderly woman in an armchair, an unconscious giant on the floor, and a lullaby. "Ma'am, are you Margaret Callahan?" "Well, I am." Her eyes met his, and suddenly they were not the eyes of a grandmother anymore. They were sharp, calculating, assessing him with the clinical efficiency of someone who had spent a lifetime sizing people up in seconds. Familiar in a way he could not place. "And you're Jack Brennan, president of the Iron Wings Motorcycle Club. Took over from Red Sullivan in 2015 and after his heart gave out. You've been running things well. Better than well, actually. The membership is up. The community work has expanded. You've kept the original spirit of the club alive." She paused, and something shifted in her expression, something that looked almost like pride. "I've been watching." Jack's hand tightened on his knife. "How do you know all that?" Margaret Callahan rose from her chair with the grace of a woman half her age. She stepped over the unconscious man like he was a fallen branch on a garden path and walked to a side table that had somehow survived the destruction. She opened a small drawer and pulled out a wooden box. Old, worn at the edges. The kind of thing a person keeps for decades, a treasure box, a memory box, the kind that holds something too important for a safe and too precious for a shelf. "I know, because I was there when the Iron Wings were born." She opened the box. Inside, resting on faded velvet, was a patch, an iron wing patch almost identical to the one on Jack's back. Almost. This one was different, older. The stitching was done by hand, not machine, every thread placed with deliberate care. The leather was worn soft from years of handling, and beneath the wings, embroidered in thread that had faded from gold to amber, was a single word: Founder. Jack felt the floor tilt beneath his feet. Behind him, Bear made a small sound, like he had been punched in the stomach. "My husband and I started this club 45 years ago," Margaret said quietly. "In a garage about half the size of yours over on Birch Street. The building isn't there anymore. They tore it down in the 90s, but the club survived. We built it to protect people, to give veterans a family when they came home with nothing. No boss, no support, no one who understood what they'd seen and done. We wanted to give them a brotherhood, a purpose, a reason to believe that their strength could be used for something good." She looked at Jack with those sharp, knowing eyes. "I've been waiting a very long time to meet you, son. I just didn't expect it to happen like this." Behind Jack, Bear made a choking sound and started to swear, a long string of profanity born from shock rather than anger. Margaret's voice cracked like a whip without her raising it above a conversational tone. "There is a child in this story, even if she's not in this room." "Yes, ma'am. Sorry, ma'am." Bear went red to the roots of his beard. Jack could not take his eyes off the patch. The founder of the Iron Wings was a man named Thomas Callahan. Died in 1982. That was gospel. That was scripture. Every member of the club learned the story during their prospecting year. Thomas Callahan and Red Sullivan, the two founders who built the Iron Wings from nothing. Thomas killed in a senseless act of violence. Red carrying on the legacy alone. The founding myth. The Sacred Origin. Thomas was my husband, Margaret said, reading his face like a book she had already memorized. And he didn't just die, he was murdered. A rival gang called the Blood Reapers wanted our territory, our connections, what we'd built. We had become influential. We had relationships with local businesses, with law enforcement, with the veteran community. Thomas refused to surrender any of it. He stood in this very living room and told their leader, a man named Patrick Rourke, that the Iron Wings would never bow to criminals. So they killed him. She closed the box gently like she was closing a coffin. I was 6 months pregnant with our daughter when they shot him in our driveway. It was October. The roses had already dropped their blooms for the year. Thomas was walking to his motorcycle. He was going to the garage to meet Red. He turned to wave goodbye to me through the kitchen window, and that was when the car pulled up. 3 men, Patrick Rourke in the passenger seat. Thomas saw them. He knew. I could see it in his face. He knew what was about to happen, and his only thought was to move away from the house. Away from me. He ran toward the street to draw them away from where I was standing. Her voice was steady, but her hands had begun to tremble. They shot him 4 times. He fell in the driveway right next to the rose bushes he had planted the spring before. I watched him bleed out on the concrete while I held my belly and screamed. The silence in the room was absolute. Jack could hear his own heartbeat, could hear the slow drip of water from the broken vase, could hear the unconscious man's labored breathing. Why didn't anyone know the club history says Thomas founded it with Red Sullivan? The history was changed, sanitized, for my protection. Margaret walked back to her chair and sat down, and for the first time she looked every one of her 78 years. The light from the window caught the lines on her face, the weathering of decades, and Jack realized that every one of those lines was a year of hiding, a year of silence, a year of living as a ghost. The Blood Reapers put a bounty on my head, on my unborn child's head. The only way to survive was to disappear. So Red took over, rewrote the records, erased every trace of my involvement, and I became nobody. Margaret Callahan, quiet widow, living alone on Cedar Street with her roses and her memories. Invisible. You've been hiding for 45 years. Hiding, watching, waiting. Her eyes drifted to the unconscious man on her floor. I always knew they'd find me eventually. I just hoped it would be after Rosie was grown. After she'd had a chance to live a real life, a full life, before the past came crashing through her door. At the mention of the girl's name, Margaret's composure cracked. Just for a second. Just enough for Jack to see the terrified grandmother beneath the warrior. It was like watching a fault line open in granite. There and gone, but real. Where is she? Is she safe? She's at our garage. Mama June's with her. She's scared, but she's okay. Margaret's hand flew to her heart. Her fingers pressed against her chest, and Jack saw her lips move in what might have been a prayer. Thank God. Mrs. Callahan. Margaret or Maggie, 45 years of hiding means I don't stand on ceremony. Margaret. Jack crouched beside the unconscious man studying the damage. Broken nose, dislocated arm, bruised throat. This had been done by someone who knew exactly where to strike and how hard. Someone trained. Who is this, and how did you put him down? Because from where I'm standing, that doesn't add up. For the first time, Margaret smiled, a real smile, with teeth. And it was the smile of a woman who had a secret she had been keeping for a very long time and was finally allowed to tell. But his name is Bruno Marsh. He's a scout for the Blood Reapers. They've been getting closer for months, following me at the grocery store, watching Rosie at school from across the street. A car that drove past the house too slowly too often. I knew they'd make their move eventually. I've been expecting it. That still doesn't explain how a 78-year-old woman put a 250-pound enforcer on the floor. Margaret held up her hands. Her knuckles were scraped raw, already bruising. The skin across her right hand was split open, showing the pink flesh beneath. I served as a combat nurse overseas, Mr. Brennan. Field hospitals, trauma wards, places where the doctors were overwhelmed and the wounded kept coming, and sometimes the people coming through the door weren't patients. I learned early that knowing how to fight was the difference between living and dying. I trained with the soldiers between shifts, learned to use my size as an advantage, Small means fast. Small means people underestimate you. I've put bigger men than him on the floor. I've saved lives and I've taken them. This one, she nudged Bruno with her foot, was sloppy, overconfident. He kicked in my door and expected to find a helpless old woman making tea. He found something else entirely. The front door burst open behind them, what remained of it swinging wildly on its single hinge. Grandma, Rosie flew across the room and launched herself into Margaret's arms. They collided with enough force to push the armchair back an inch on the hardwood. The impact of the small body against the old woman's frame made Margaret gasp, but she wrapped her arms around the child with a fierceness that suggested she would rather break than let go. They said you were hurt. They said, "Shh, baby, shh, I'm fine. I'm right here, I'm right here." Mama June appeared in the doorway, breathing hard, her silver braids swinging. Couldn't stop her. The second she heard we were heading this way, she jumped on the back of Spike's bike, like she'd been riding her whole life, held on tight, didn't even flinch at the speed. Rosie pulled back, scanning Margaret's face, her hands, her arms looking for damage, with the practiced efficiency of a child who had learned too young to check for bruises. "I saw him through the window. He grabbed your arm. You screamed." "I screamed because I wanted you to run, baby. Not because I was scared. I needed you out of the house." Rosie's eyes found the unconscious man on the floor. Her face went pale. She stared at him for a long time, at his broken nose, at his twisted arm, at his massive body crumpled and still. "Did you do that?" Margaret hesitated, then nodded. "I did." "How?" Margaret glanced at Jack, then back at her granddaughter. A decision passed across her face, a reckoning with a truth she had hoped to keep buried. "Baby, there are some things about Grandma that I never told you. Things I thought you were too young to know. Things I hoped you'd never have to know. I thought if I kept them hidden deep enough, they would never touch you." She pulled Rosie onto her lap. The girl was almost too big for it, really, all knees and elbows and growing bones, but neither of them seemed to care. "Some things are more important than fit. A long time ago, before your mommy was born, Grandma was a different person. I was strong, I was fierce. I helped start something important. A group of people who protected others. Like guardians. Like angels. Your grandfather Thomas and I built it together from nothing, in a tiny garage with a leaking roof and a dream that probably should have been impossible." She paused, drew a breath that seemed to cost her something. "And the man on the floor works for very bad people. People who hurt your grandfather a long time ago. People who—" Margaret stopped. Her voice caught on something sharp like a thread snagging on a nail. "People who might have hurt your mommy too." The words hung in the air. Jack watched Rosie's face transform, confusion into understanding, understanding into something darker, something no 7-year-old should carry. A knowledge that settled into her features like sediment falling to the bottom of a disturbed river. "Mommy's car accident." Rosie's voice was barely a whisper. "It wasn't an accident. I don't know for sure, baby. I've suspected for 2 years, but I couldn't prove it. I've lain awake at night going over it, and I couldn't prove it. They killed my mommy." The words were quiet, far too quiet for a 7-year-old. They came out flat factual, as if Rosie was reading a line from a textbook, rather than speaking about the death of her mother. "I don't know, but I'm going to find out. And these men," Margaret gestured to Jack and his brothers, "they're going to help me." Jack straightened his spine. He did not remember making a decision. It was not a decision. It was gravity. "We are." Margaret's eyes met his. Steel on steel, old steel meeting new. "The Blood Reapers aren't finished. Bruno was just a scout, a test, a finger poking into the darkness to see what bites. When he doesn't report back, they'll send more. They'll come in force. How many? Their full chapter. 30, maybe 40. Led by a man named Dominic Rourke. His father was the one who killed my Thomas. Patrick Rourke. He died in prison in 2010, but his son has been carrying the grudge like a torch ever since. You've been tracking them. For 45 years. Every move, every crime, every victim, every dollar they earned from drugs and weapons and human suffering." Margaret reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a small USB drive. It was silver, unremarkable, the kind you could buy at any office supply store, but the data on it was anything but ordinary. I have everything. Names, dates, account numbers, phone records, surveillance photos, enough to bring them down 10 times over. I've been feeding information to the FBI for decades. Then why haven't they been arrested? Because the Bureau wanted the bigger targets, the cartels the Blood Reapers work with, the politicians they've bought, the money laundering operations that stretch across state lines. They asked me to wait, to keep gathering, to stay hidden until the time was right, until they had enough to take down not just the Reapers, but the entire network above them. She looked at Bruno's unconscious form. The time wasn't right, but it's here anyway. Jack ran his hand through his hair. Sweat was drying on the back of his neck. Outside, he could hear the idle of the motorcycles, the murmur of his brothers waiting for orders. This was supposed to be a simple rescue mission. Save a grandmother from an attacker, maybe call the cops, file a report, get back to the garage in time for the evening poker game. Instead, he was standing in the middle of a 45-year war he didn't even know existed, holding a knife in one hand and a truth that was going to change everything in the other. Margaret, I don't know what you want from us. The Iron Wings aren't a militia. We're a motorcycle club. We do charity rides and community events and toy drives at Christmas. We fix bikes and help veterans find jobs and housing. You're not what? Margaret's voice sharpened like a blade being drawn from a sheath. You're not protectors because that's exactly what you are. That's what those patches mean. That's what Thomas built. That's what you've kept alive for 45 years, whether you knew the full story or not. Every time you rode for a veteran who was struggling, every time you showed up at a house where a family was being threatened, every time you stood between someone weak and someone strong, you were living the mission Thomas and I built this club to fulfill. She stood still, holding Rosie's hand. The little girl's fingers were wrapped around her grandmother so tightly that both sets of knuckles had gone white. I'm not asking you to fight a war. I'm asking you to do what you've always done. Stand between the innocent and the darkness. My granddaughter is innocent, and the darkness is coming whether you stand or not. Jack looked at Rosie, at her dirty face and bloody feet, at her torn pink dress and the eyes that carried a weight no child should bear. She looked back at him without flinching, without begging, without pleading, just looking, measuring him the same way her grandmother had, deciding whether he was the man his patches said he was. You promised, she said quietly. You promised nobody would hurt my grandma. I did. Are you a liar? The question hit him like a fist to the sternum. Jack Brennan had been many things in his life. A drunk who had lost 3 years to the bottom of a bottle. A fighter who had broken his hands on other men's faces for reasons he could barely remember. A fool who had driven away every woman who ever tried to love him because he was too broken to accept what he didn't think he deserved. He had made mistakes that still kept him awake at 3 in the morning. He had done things he would never speak of aloud. But he had never broken a promise to a child. That was the line. That was the one thing he held on to when everything else slipped away. Bear. Yeah, press. Call the chapter. All of them. Full assembly at the clubhouse in 1 hour. We going to war? Jack looked at Margaret Callahan, at the founder of everything he had dedicated his life to, at the tiny warrior who had spent 45 years in exile protecting a legacy her husband died for while the world forgot she ever existed. No, he said slowly, we're going to do what Iron Wings do. We're going to protect our own. She's the founder's widow, and that little girl is her blood. Jack crossed to the door. If that doesn't make them ours, nothing does. He paused in the doorway and looked back at the room, at the destruction, at Bruno still unconscious on the floor, at Margaret holding Rosie against her chest. 2 generations of Callahan women, one old as the hills and one young as the morning, both made of the same unbreakable material. 1 hour, Margaret. Have that USB drive ready. Tell me everything you know about the Blood Reapers. And for God's sake, he gestured at Bruno. Someone zip-tie this piece of garbage before he wakes up. He walked out into the Texas heat, his mind racing. The sun was lower now, hanging above the rooftops like a swollen orange eye. The roses in the front yard caught the light and seemed to burn. Behind him, he heard Rosie's voice, small but steady. Grandma, are those men really going to help us? And Margaret's response strong, despite everything. Yes, baby, They're iron wings. It's what they do. The clubhouse was packed within the hour. Every member had answered the call. 28 men and women stood in the main hall leather vests, shoulder to shoulder, filling the room with the smell of motor oil and coffee and nervous sweat. The hall was not large. It had been built as a warehouse in the 1960s and converted piecemeal over the decades. So the walls were corrugated metal and the floor was poured concrete that had been painted over so many times the surface looked like geological strata. Photographs lined the walls. Every president of the Iron Wings going back to the founding. Thomas Callahan's picture hung in the place of honor above the president's chair, a young man with a strong jaw and kind eyes and a leather vest that bore the first iron wing patch ever made. Jack stood at the head of the room beneath that photograph. Margaret stood at his side, her posture ramrod straight, her chin high. She did not look like a victim. She did not look like a refugee from a 45-year hiding. She looked like a general addressing her troops before a battle that would define them all. Rosie sat with Mama June in the corner, wrapped in a blanket, watching everything with quiet intensity. Someone had cleaned her feet and bandaged them with gauze. Someone else had brought her a cup of hot chocolate. She held it with both hands, but had not taken a sip. Most of you were there when Rosie Callahan ran into our garage 3 hours ago, Jack began. His voice filled the room without effort. He had learned long ago that a leader does not need to shout. He needs to mean it. Most of you rode with me to Cedar Street. You saw what we found. What you don't know, what none of us knew, is who Margaret Callahan really is. He turned to the elderly woman beside him. You want to tell them, or should I? Margaret stepped forward. She looked out at the sea of faces, young and old, men and women, scarred and smooth, united by nothing more than a shared belief that strength should protect, not destroy. She took a breath. My name is Margaret Callahan, but 45 years ago I was Maggie Morrison, and along with my husband Thomas, I founded this club. Silence. Absolute stunned silence. The kind of silence that has weight that presses on the eardrums and makes the air feel thick. That's impossible. The voice came from the back. Spike, one of the younger members, 24 years old, still wearing his prospect patch less than a year ago. The founders were Thomas Callahan and Red Sullivan. Everyone knows that. Red was my husband's best friend. They served overseas together, came home together, built the Iron Wings together. But when Thomas was murdered, Red did something extraordinary. He took over the club, rewrote the records, erased every trace of me, and told the world that he and Thomas had done it alone. He did it to save my life. The Blood Reapers had put a bounty on my head, on my unborn child's head. The only way to survive was to disappear. The Blood Reapers disbanded in the 90s. Another voice, this one from the middle of the room. Colt, a former Marine, his face a roadmap of old scars. They went underground, changed their methods, changed their name on paper, but kept the same leadership, the same operations, the same cruelty, expanded their empire. Margaret's voice was ice, clear, hard, sharp enough to cut. They've been running drugs and weapons through 3 states for 30 years. They've corrupted police departments and judges and federal officials. And they've been hunting me the entire time, slowly, patiently, getting closer year by year like a tide that never stops rising. She held up the USB drive. I have proof. Their crimes, their connections, the murder of my husband. And possibly, her voice cracked for just 1 second, just one fracture in the ice. The murder of my daughter 2 years ago. Rosie made a small sound from the corner, a sound like air escaping from a punctured tire. Mama June pulled her closer and held her tight. What do you want from us? Bear's voice was careful, measured. We're not soldiers. Most of us haven't thrown a punch in years. I want you to be what you've always been, protectors. Margaret looked around the room, meeting every pair of eyes in turn, taking her time, letting each person feel the weight of her gaze. The Blood Reapers are coming. Not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. And when they come, they won't just come for me. They'll come for all of you. Because you're wearing those patches. Because you represent everything they tried to destroy 45 years ago. Because as long as the Iron Wings exist, their victory over Thomas isn't complete. Jack watched his brothers process this, saw the fear on some faces naked and honest, the anger on others dark and hot. the uncertainty rippling through the room like a stone thrown into still water. "We have a choice," he said into the silence. "We can walk away. Hand Margaret over to the FBI and hope they protect her. Go back to our lives and pretend this never happened. Pretend we never met a 7-year-old girl who ran barefoot through 6 blocks of this city to find us because her grandmother told her the men with wings would help." He let that sit, let it breathe, let every person in the room feel the shape of it. Or we can do what Thomas Callahan built this club to do. We can stand between the innocent and the darkness. We can protect a woman who spent 45 years protecting our legacy. We can show the Blood Reapers that the Iron Wings don't run. We don't hide. We don't abandon our own. Bear stood up first, slowly, deliberately. Every eye in the room tracked his movement. "I didn't join this club to fix motorcycles and do charity rides. I joined because when I came back from overseas with nothing, no family, no purpose, nothing but nightmares and a bottle that was emptier every morning, you gave me all three. You gave me a family. You gave me a reason to get up. You gave me a code that meant something." He looked at Margaret. "If she started that, then she's my family too. I'm in." Colt stood next, then Flint, then Griff, the youngest of them, barely 22, who had joined the club 6 months ago because he had no one else. One by one, like dominoes falling in slow motion, every member of the Iron Wings rose to their feet. Some were shaking, some were crying, all of them were standing. Jack felt something swell in his chest. Pride, hope, terror, because he knew what was coming, and he knew they were not ready, not even close. But they were going to stand anyway, because that was what the Wings meant. "All right," he turned to Margaret. "Tell us everything, every name, every connection, every weakness. If we're going to face the Blood Reapers, we're going to win." Margaret Callahan smiled, and for just a moment Jack saw the woman she must have been 45 years ago. Fierce, unbreakable, unstoppable. The woman who had helped build an empire of protection from nothing. The woman who had watched her husband die and climbed out a back window and run through the woods with a baby in her belly because surrender was a word that did not exist in her vocabulary. "Then let's begin." Outside, the sun was setting over Cedar Falls. The sky burned orange and purple, and the heat shimmered off the asphalt like something alive. Somewhere out there, a storm was gathering. Men with black hearts and long memories were sharpening their knives and loading their guns, getting ready to finish a war that had started before most of them were born. But inside the clubhouse, 28 Iron Wings sat in a circle around a 78-year-old woman and listened. And in the corner, wrapped in a blanket with blood still drying on her feet, a 7-year-old girl watched it all with eyes that had already seen too much but still held somewhere deep beneath the hurt a stubborn, unquenchable light. Rosie Callahan had run barefoot through 6 blocks of Cedar Falls to find the angels. She had found them. And now, for better or worse, the angels were going to fly. 3 hours after Margaret Callahan told her story, Jack Brennan's head was spinning. The USB drive contained more information than he could process in a lifetime. Financial records stretching back decades, page after page of transactions coded in a system Margaret had developed herself. Phone logs cross-referenced with dates and locations. Surveillance photographs taken from cars and rooftops and park benches showing men in suits and men in leather making deals in parking lots and back rooms and the private dining areas of expensive restaurants. A web of corruption that stretched from local police departments to state legislators to federal officials whose names Jack recognized from the evening news. The Blood Reapers were not just a motorcycle gang. They were an empire built on blood and silence. "How did you get all this?" he asked Margaret. They were alone in his office, the door closed, the rest of the club dispersed to their various posts. The office was small and cluttered, every surface covered with motorcycle parts catalogs and charity event flyers and framed photographs of club rides. It smelled like coffee and leather and the faint ghost of the cigarettes Jack had quit smoking 5 years ago. 45 years of patience. She sipped the tea Mama June had brought on her. The cup looked enormous in her small hands. 45 years of watching, of making friends in low places and high ones, of being invisible. You'd be amazed what people say in front of an old woman they don't think is paying attention. And the FBI just let you operate on your own. I had a contact, a woman I met during my service overseas. She was wounded badly, Shrapnel from a mortar round, lost her leg below the knee. I held her hand through the worst of it, through 3 surgeries and 6 weeks of recovery. She came home, went to law school, joined the bureau. Never forgot the nurse who stayed with her when the doctors had given up and gone to sleep. She fed you information. I fed her information. Everything I gathered, every crime I documented, every connection I mapped. I was her best source for 20 years. Margaret set down her cup. In exchange, she protected me, made sure the Blood Reapers never got too close, made sure my name stayed out of every database and every file. Until now. Until now. What changed? Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Her eyes drifted to the window where the last light of day was bleeding out of the sky, turning the clouds the color of a bruise. Dominic Rourke happened. He took over the Blood Reapers 3 years ago. His father, the man who killed Tommy, died in prison in 2010. Liver cancer. Took him slow. Dominic visited him every week for the last 6 months, sat by his bedside, listened to every bitter word, every regret, every poisoned lesson. He spent his whole life in his father's shadow, preparing, planning, obsessing over the one thing his father failed to finish. You. Me, because as long as I'm alive, someone remembers. Someone can testify. Someone can look the world in the eye and say, this is what they did. This is who they really are. Her eyes hardened. The softness she had shown with Rosie was gone, replaced by something cold and sharp. And because Dominic Rourke is not just a criminal, he's a sadist. He doesn't just want me dead. He wants me to suffer first. He wants me to watch everything I love burn before he puts out the last light. That's what his father taught him. That death is a mercy. That real punishment is living long enough to see everything you love destroyed. Jack thought of Rosie, of her torn dress and bleeding feet, of her promise that she would find the angels, of the quiet, terrible calm in her voice when she asked if her mother's death was an accident. That's why they went after your daughter. It was not a question. Margaret nodded slowly. Her jaw tightened, and Jack saw the muscles in her neck work as she swallowed something that wanted to come up. Sarah, my baby girl. She had no idea about any of this. I kept her completely out of it. Never told her about her father's legacy. Never told her who I really was. She grew up thinking her father was a good man who died in a random act of violence, which was half true. She grew up normal, happy, got married to a decent man who loved her, had Rosie, built a beautiful life in a quiet neighborhood with good schools and a garden she tended on weekends. She paused. Her hands had started to tremble again. And they took it from her. The accident report said brake failure, mechanical error. It happens. Cars are machines. Machines break. Everyone said how tragic it was, how unfair, how random. The police closed the case in 2 weeks. Her voice turned bitter, corrosive. But Sarah had that car serviced 2 weeks before. Full inspection. I checked the records. The mechanic was a young man named Eddie Voss, 26 years old. He signed off on the car as perfect. 3 days after Sarah died, Eddie Voss was found hanging in his apartment. They called it a suicide. No note, no history of depression, just a dead mechanic who knew too much. Lord have mercy. Sarah died thinking her father was a nobody who was shot in a random robbery. She died not knowing she was the daughter of a legend, not knowing the real reason she lost her father before she was born, not knowing that her mother had spent 4 decades fighting a shadow war to keep her safe. Margaret's hands trembled around her teacup. The surface of the tea rippled like a tiny sea in a storm. That's my greatest shame, Jack. Not the hiding, not the 45 years of exile, that I protected her so well she never knew who she really was. She deserved to know. She deserved to understand why her father was a hero. She deserved to carry that with pride instead of the nothing I gave her. You kept her alive for 40 years. That's not nothing. And then I got her killed anyway, because I got complacent, because I stopped watching every shadow, because I thought 40 years was long enough for old grudges to die. She set down the teacup with exaggerated care, as if she was afraid that any sudden movement would cause something inside her to shatter. Rosie is all I have left, the last piece of Sarah, the last piece of Thomas. If they take her, there's nothing left. The whole line ends. Everything Thomas and I built, everything we fought for, Everything we sacrificed, it all disappears. They won't take her. You can't promise that. Watch me. A knock at the door shattered the moment. Bear's face appeared in the gap, pale beneath his beard, grim. President, we've got company. What kind? FBI? 4 black SUVs. About 15 agents in tactical gear. Pulled up in the parking lot like they own the place. And they don't look friendly. Margaret stood so fast her tea spilled across the desk, pooling around the USB drive and a stack of invoices. No, it's too soon. We're not ready. Ready for what? But Margaret was already moving toward the door, her small frame cutting through the space with an urgency that belied her age. Agent Vivian Holt was a compact woman with sharp cheekbones and the kind of eyes that missed nothing and forgave less. She stood in the Iron Wing's main hall like she owned it, 15 armed agents at her back, all of them in black tactical gear, with FBI stenciled in yellow across their chests. Her badge hung from a lanyard around her neck, but something about her posture suggested she was not entirely comfortable wearing it, like it was a costume she had been wearing too long. Margaret, her voice was clipped professional. We need to talk, now. You couldn't have called. Phones aren't secure, not anymore. Holt's eyes swept the room, taking in the bikers, the patches, the barely concealed hostility radiating from 28 people who had just learned that the federal government might be as much an enemy as the Blood Reapers. The Blood Reapers have people inside the Bureau. We've known for years, but we didn't know who. We suspected someone at the senior level, someone with access to protected witness files and ongoing operation details. She paused. Let the weight settle. Now we do. Who? Assistant Director Garrett Bryce. Holt's jaw tightened. Jack watched a vein pulse in her temple. He's been feeding them information for 2 decades, since before I joined the Bureau. He knows everything, Margaret. Your location, your routines, your granddaughter's school schedule, her teacher's name, the route she walks home, the hours you spend in your garden. Rosie, who had been quietly drawing in the corner with crayons Mama June had found somewhere, looked up at the mention of her school. Her hand stopped moving. Her eyes went still. How long do we have? Margaret asked. Hours, maybe less. Bryce tipped them off the second Bruno Marsh missed his check-in. They're mobilizing, full chapter plus reinforcements from their allies in Houston and San Antonio. Every Blood Reaper within 300 miles is heading this way. How many? 60, maybe 70. The room went cold. Jack could feel it like someone had opened a freezer door. Every person in the room did the math at the same time and arrived at the same terrible number. Jack stepped forward. We have 28 members, 30 if you count Margaret and Mama June. Then you're outnumbered at least 2 to 1. 3 to 1 if we're honest about our capabilities. Most of our people haven't been in a real fight in years. Some of them have never been in one at all. Holt nodded slowly, which is why I'm here. She reached into her jacket and pulled out her badge, held it for a moment, looked at it, then tossed it onto the table where it landed with a dull metallic thud that sounded like a door closing. Officially, I'm supposed to take Margaret into protective custody, move her to a safe house somewhere in New Mexico, let the legal process play out over the next several years while the Bureau builds a case that Garrett Bryce will dismantle from the inside. She looked at Margaret, and something passed between them. Decades of trust, of secrets exchanged in coded phone calls and dead drops in anonymous email accounts, of promises kept in the dark. Unofficially, I'm tired of waiting. Bryce has blocked every attempt to bring down the Blood Reapers for 20 years. Every investigation stalled. Every witness recanted or disappeared. Every case fell apart at the crucial moment because someone on the inside was feeding the other side our playbook. As long as Bryce is in charge, they'll never face justice. So what are you proposing? I have contacts in 4 other law enforcement agencies, veterans who owe me, women I served with who are now sheriffs and U.S. Marshals in 3 different states. Good people who have been waiting for someone to finally kick this door open. I can mobilize them, but it takes time. How much time? 3 hours. Jack felt the weight of that number. 3 hours, 180 minutes. An eternity when 60 armed men were heading your way with murder in their hearts. The Blood Reapers think they're coming to clean up a loose end, Holt continued. They think this is going to be easy. One old woman, a handful of bikers, a quick night's work. They have no idea what's actually waiting for them. Margaret's been gathering evidence for 45 years. I've been building cases for 20. Tonight, we don't just defend this clubhouse. She looked around the room at every biker, every patch, every face. Tonight, we end the Blood Reapers forever. Jack looked at Margaret, at Holt, at his brothers and sisters standing around the room, outnumbered, outgunned, but something else too, something that could not be measured in numbers. What do you need from us? 3 hours, that's all. Hold this position for 3 hours against whatever they send. Can you do it? Jack thought about running, about hiding, about handing Margaret over and going back to his quiet life of poker games and oil changes. Then he thought about Rosie, about a 7-year-old girl running barefoot through the streets of Cedar Falls because her grandmother told her to find the angels, about the blood on the garage floor and the light in those impossible eyes. 3 hours, he said. You'll have them. Holt nodded. Then let's get to work. The sun had barely disappeared behind the horizon when the first engine rumbled in the distance. Jack's hand froze on the sandbag he had been stacking against the clubhouse windows. He tilted his head, one engine, then two, then a dozen, then more joining the chorus until the sound was a continuous growl rolling toward them like thunder across a plain. It was a sound Jack knew well. Motorcycle engines, but not the friendly rumble of an afternoon ride. This was something else. This was coordinated, deliberate. This was the sound of an army. That's not ours, Bear said quietly from beside him. His face had gone the color of old cement. No, it's not. Jack grabbed his radio. Everyone inside, now, they're early. The Iron Wings moved fast. 28 men and women abandoned their positions around the perimeter and flooded back into the clubhouse. Holt's FBI team had disappeared into the shadows, setting up surveillance positions that would document everything but intervene only as a last resort. The deal was simple. Holt's people would record the Blood Reapers' assault, every shot fired, every order given, every crime committed. Evidence that no corrupt assistant director could suppress. I thought we had 3 hours, Colt hissed. So did I. Margaret appeared at the Jack's elbow. Her face was pale, but her eyes were absolutely steady. 2 points of cold, clear light in the gathering darkness. Dominic Rourke doesn't wait. His father was patient, a planner, a strategist who took his time and chose his moments. Dominic is a storm. He hits hard, he hits fast, and he doesn't stop until everything in front of him is flat. How many? Listen. Jack listened. The engines were multiplying. What had been a dozen was now 20, 30, more. The sound filled the sky like an approaching wall of noise. All of them, Margaret whispered. He brought everything he has. Grandma, Rosie's voice cut through the tension like a blade through fabric. She stood in the doorway to the back room, clutching the blanket Mama June had wrapped her in. Her bandaged feet were white against the dark concrete floor. I'm scared. Margaret crossed to her granddaughter in 3 quick strides, knelt down, took Rosie's face in her hands. Her thumbs wiped tears that had not yet fallen. Remember what I taught you. When you're scared, what do? Breathe, count to 10, find something to hold on to. And what are you holding on to right now? Rosie's small hand pressed against Margaret's chest right over her heart. She could feel it beating, strong and steady and real. You. Then you have nothing to be scared of, because I'm not going anywhere. Promise? Margaret hesitated. A fraction of a second, a tiny crack in the armor that Rosie caught immediately. Don't promise, Rosie said. Her voice was eerily calm, far too controlled for a child standing on the edge of violence. It's okay, Grandma. Mommy couldn't promise either. She said she'd pick me up from school and then she didn't come. I waited on the bench for 2 hours. The teacher stayed with me. Then Uncle David came instead, and his face was wrong, and I knew. Margaret's composure shattered. Tears spilled down her feathered cheeks, carving channels through the powder she had applied that morning in a different lifetime. Baby, I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry, just fight. Rosie pulled back and looked at her grandmother with a steadiness that belonged to someone who had already buried the most important person in her world and survived it. You taught me that bad people don't stop until someone stops them. So stop them, Grandma. Stop them like you stopped that man in our house. Outside, a voice amplified by a bullhorn shattered the silence. Margaret Callahan, I know you're in there. I know the Iron Wings are protecting you. And I know you think you're safe. Dominic Rourke. Jack had never heard the man's voice before, but he knew it instantly. There was something wrong with it. Something hollow and mechanical like a human being, with all the warmth and mercy scraped out, leaving only the architecture of malice. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to walk out that door alone and unarmed, and I'm going to finish what my father started 45 years ago. If you don't come out in 60 seconds, we're coming in. And everyone inside dies. Men, women. A pause that lasted a heartbeat too long. Children. Rosie flinched, one small, involuntary tremor that ran through her body like a current. Margaret straightened. Her spine went rigid, her jaw locked, and something changed in her eyes. Something that Jack recognized. He had seen it in the eyes of men who had decided to fight not because they thought they could win, but because surrender was not a word in their vocabulary. I'm going out. Like hell you are. Jack grabbed her arm. He'll kill everyone if I don't. He'll kill everyone anyway. Men like that don't stop. They don't keep promises. They don't honor bargains. You know that better than anyone. Then what do you suggest? Let me talk to him. Buy us time. He won't listen. He doesn't have to listen. He just has to hesitate. Every second he spends talking to me is a second Holt's reinforcements get closer. Jack held her gaze. 3 hours. That's what we need. I'm going to get us those 3 hours. Before anyone could stop him, he walked to the front door and kicked it open. The night air hit him like a wall. Hot, humid, thick with the smell of exhaust from 60 idling motorcycles. Dominic Rourke. His voice carried across the empty space between the clubhouse and the army arrayed before him. 50, 60, maybe more. A wall of chrome and leather and violence headlights cutting through the darkness like the eyes of predators. I'm Jack Brennan, president of the Iron Wings, and I've got something to say. Rourke stood at the center of his force. Tall, lean, a face like carved stone with no warmth in it, all sharp angles and hollow cheeks, and eyes that reflected the headlights back as flat, dead discs. He lowered his bullhorn. Even from 50 feet away, Jack could see the amusement on his face, the way a cat is amused by a mouse that refuses to run. The Iron Wings. I remember your club. You used to be something. Now you're just a bunch of old men playing dress-up on the weekends. Maybe, but we're old men who don't scare easy. You should be scared. You're hiding a woman who's been a thorn in my family's side for 45 years. Why does it matter? Jack kept his voice steady, conversational, like they were discussing the weather instead of the extinction of a bloodline. Every second of dialogue was a second Holt's reinforcements got closer. It's been 45 years. Your father's dead. The old war is over. Why come all this way for one old woman? Rourke's smile was something inhuman. It pulled at his lips without reaching his eyes. Because she's the last one. The last person who remembers what we did. The last person who can testify. The last person who carries our shame. Shame? My father killed her husband, shot him down in his own driveway like an animal. 4 bullets, one for each year the Iron Wings had defied us. Rourke's voice dropped to something low and intimate, as if sharing a secret. And then he let her live. Had the gun, had the opportunity. She was standing right there belly round with their unborn child, and he let her walk away. That sounds like mercy. It was weakness. Rourke spat the word like poison. He spent the rest of his life regretting it. Died in prison, broken and hollow, whispering her name because he couldn't finish what he started. Because one moment of weakness undid everything he had built. So this is about your father's legacy, about proving the Blood Reapers don't leave loose ends. This is about completion. This is about finishing the sentence my father started writing 45 years ago. Jack felt sick, not from the threat. He had faced threats before, stood in front of loaded guns before. He felt sick because he recognized something in Rourke's eyes, something painfully familiar. Obsession. The burning, all-consuming obsession of a son trying to earn the love of a dead father. Jack knew that fire. He had carried it himself for 20 years. Let me tell you something about fathers, Jack said slowly. Mine was a drunk who beat my mother every Friday night and left when I was 12. Walked out the door without his jacket and never came back. I spent 20 years trying to outrun that, fighting in bars, drinking until I couldn't see, destroying everything good that came near me, all because I wanted to prove I wasn't him. And you know what I figured out? What's your point? My point is that you can spend your whole life finishing your father's story, or you can write your own. Your father was a murderer, a coward who shot a man in front of his pregnant wife. You don't have to be. Rourke stared at him. Then he laughed. It was a terrible sound, like rocks grinding together in a dry riverbed. No joy, no humor, just the mechanical expression of contempt. You think you can save me with a few pretty words? He raised his gun. I didn't come here to talk. I came here to end this, starting with you. The shot cracked through the night like the world splitting open. Jack dove sideways, hitting the ground as the bullet sang past his ear so close he felt the heat of it on his skin. He rolled, found cover behind a concrete planter that had been placed there years ago as decoration and was now the only thing between him and death. More shots, glass shattering, wood splintering, the iron wings returning fire from the windows, their muzzle flashes lighting the interior of the clubhouse like strobe lights. "Fall back!" Jack screamed into his radio. "Second line now!" He crawled toward the door. Bullets kicked up dirt around him, pocking the ground like rain on dry soil. Blood dripped from a cut on his forehead where he had hit the planter. Hands grabbed him bare and Colt, dragging him inside with the desperate strength of men saving something they could not afford to lose. "You hit. I'm fine. Status. 3 wounded, nothing life-threatening. But they're moving, coordinated, professional. These aren't just bikers, Jack. These guys have training." "Rourke recruits ex-military," Margaret said. She had appeared beside him, a shotgun in her hands that she held with the practiced ease of someone who had carried weapons in places where the stakes were measured in lives, not points. Mercenaries, private military contractors, men who've killed for money and liked it. "Wonderful," Holt's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Reinforcements are 75 minutes out. Can you hold?" "I don't know." "You have to." "Easy for you to say. You're not the one getting shot at." "Actually, it isn't easy to say. Rourke's men just found my surveillance team. We're repositioning. I'll be off comms for a few minutes." The connection cut out with a hiss of static. Jack grabbed his gun and stood. His body ached. His ears rang. His forehead bled. But 28 people were looking at him, waiting for direction. Waiting for him to tell them it was going to be okay. Waiting for the leader they had chosen to lead. "Listen to me," he said. "We're outgunned, outmanned, outmatched in every way that can be measured on paper. But we've got something they don't." "What's that?" Bear asked. "We're protecting someone we love. They're fighting for a dead man's pride. We've got a reason. All they've got is a grudge." He looked around the room, at Bear, bleeding from a gash on his arm, at Colt, jaw set in grim determination, at the prospects who had never seen combat, pale and shaking, but still on their feet, at Margaret holding a shotgun like she had been born with one, at Rosie watching from the security monitors in the back room, her small face lit by the glow of the screens. "We hold this line," Jack said. "We hold it until help arrives, or until there's nobody left to hold it. Those are the only 2 options. And if help doesn't come, then we make them pay for every inch. We make them remember that the iron wings don't break. We make them understand that this is what it means to be guardians." He racked his shotgun. The sound echoed through the room like a period at the end of a sentence. "Strength protects, violence corrupts. Let's show them the difference." The next wave hit like a tsunami. Rourke's men came from 3 directions at once, front door, side windows, and the roof access that Bear hadn't quite finished blocking. The clubhouse became a war zone. Plaster fell from the ceiling, light fixtures swung and shattered. The photographs on the walls were torn apart by bullets, decades of memories reduced to confetti. Jack fired until the barrel of his gun was too hot to touch. Reloaded. Fired again. Around him, his brothers fought with everything they had. Bear took a bullet to the leg and kept shooting from the floor, propping his massive frame against a filing cabinet, his face gray with pain, but his aim steady. Colt tackled a blood reaper who breached the side door and put him down with his bare hands, pure Marine instinct taking over. Griff, the youngest of them, held a stairwell alone for 11 minutes until reinforcements could reach him, and when Jack finally got to him, the kid was out of ammunition and holding a fire extinguisher like a baseball bat. But they were losing, slowly, inevitably, room by room, inch by inch. The Blood Reapers were too many, too well-armed, too disciplined. For every one they put down, two more appeared. "Fall back to the basement," Jack ordered. His voice was hoarse from shouting over the gunfire. His ears were ringing so badly he could barely hear his own commands. They retreated in order. Margaret first, then Rosie, then Mama June, then the wounded carried on makeshift stretchers made from doors ripped off their hinges. Jack stayed at the rear, covering the withdrawal, firing at anything that moved. A bullet caught him in the side. The pain was extraordinary, white-hot, blinding, like someone had shoved a red-hot poker between his ribs. He staggered, caught himself on a wall. His hand came away from his flank, slick and red. For a moment, the world went bright and strange, and he could hear his father's voice saying something about weakness, about men who fall down, about the difference between a fighter and a quitter. He kept moving. Press Bear's voice was raw with panic. "You're hit." "I noticed. Keep moving. That's an order." They reached the basement. 23 people in a space meant for 10, the wounded groaning on makeshift beds, the able-bodied reloading with bloody hands. The air was thick with gun smoke and sweat and the copper penny smell of blood. Jack slid down the wall, leaving a red smear on the concrete. Blood seeped between his fingers where he pressed against the hole in his side. "How bad?" Margaret knelt beside him. Her hands were gentle as she pulled his shirt away. Her face went pale. Not the pale of shock, but the pale of professional assessment. The pale of a nurse who had seen wounds like this before and knew exactly what they meant. "The bullet's still inside." "I know. If we don't get it out, I know what happens if we don't get it out, but right now, it doesn't matter. What matters is keeping you and Rosie alive long enough for help to arrive. Jack, listen to me." Margaret's voice was urgent, stripped of everything except the raw truth. "Rourke wants me. He'll do anything to get to me, but he won't kill the others if he doesn't have to. He wants a clean ending, a complete ending to his father's story. My death witnessed, verified, definitive. If it comes down to it, don't. If it comes down to it, I surrender. I walk out there. I give myself up, not for me, for Rosie, for everyone else in this room. And then what Rourke kills you, and everyone lives happily ever after. Rourke kills me and goes to prison. Holt has everything she needs. The evidence, the recordings, the testimony. The moment he pulls that trigger, his life is over. That's not a victory, Margaret. That's a sacrifice. Sometimes they're the same thing. Grandma, Jack, Rosie's voice from across the room. She was standing at the security monitors, her small hand pointing at the largest screen. You need to see this. Jack pulled himself up, ignoring the agony that tore through his midsection like a living thing. He limped to the monitors, leaving a trail of red drops on the concrete floor. His heart stopped. Headlights, dozens of them, hundreds, coming from every direction along every road that led to the clubhouse. A constellation of light converging on their position. Rourke's reinforcements, he breathed. His stomach dropped. But Rosie shook her head. Look at the patches. Jack squinted at the grainy footage, at the figures climbing off motorcycles, at the leather vests catching the moonlight. He leaned closer, his nose almost touching the screen. Wings, not iron wings, different designs, different colors, different shapes. Eagle wings and hawk wings and phoenix wings and dove wings and wings made of fire and wings made of stars, but unmistakably, undeniably wings. What the hell? Margaret made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, a sound that contained 45 years of hope she had not allowed herself to feel. I helped a lot of people over 45 years, Jack. A lot of clubs, a lot of riders. When someone was in trouble, when a club was under pressure, when a veteran needed a hand, I was there. Quietly, anonymously, I sent money and information and connections. I helped clubs get started and helped members get sober and helped families get back on their feet. Hundreds of people, maybe thousands, all from the shadows, all without asking for anything in return. You called them. I called everyone I had a number for, every favor I never collected, every debt I never mentioned. I just didn't think they'd actually come. Outside, the reinforcements slammed into Rourke's forces from behind. The organized assault shattered like a mirror hitting a floor. The disciplined formation broke apart as the Blood Reapers found themselves fighting on two fronts, their coordinated advance dissolving into confusion and panic. Jack watched it happen on the monitors, watched the tide turn, watched Rourke's army dissolve into chaos. "It's not over," he said quietly. "No, but the odds just got a whole lot better." Bear appeared at his shoulder, blood still running from his wounded leg, his face split between pain and something that looked like wild, disbelieving joy. "We can push out, catch them in a crossfire." Jack looked at his wounded side, at his exhausted brothers, at the darkness outside that was suddenly impossibly full of allies. "Do it. Everyone who can still fight, we push out. We end this tonight." He turned to Rosie. "Stay here. Guard your grandmother." Rosie's eyes were wide, but steady, steady as her grandmother's. "What if they come down here?" Jack looked at her for a long moment. Then he knelt wincing and put his hands on her shoulders. He could feel her bones through the thin fabric of her dress, could feel her trembling, just slightly, a vibration so subtle only touch could detect it. "Then you run, and you don't look back. You find Mama June and you get out of this building. You hear me?" "I hear you. Promise me." "I promise, but you have to promise too." "Promise what?" "That you'll come back." Jack's throat tightened. He kissed the top of her head, something he had never done before, something that felt as natural as breathing. "I'll come back, kid." Then he was moving, up the stairs, through the ruined clubhouse, stepping over debris and spent shell casings and shattered glass, out into the night. The world outside was chaos. Motorcycles everywhere, some upright, some on their sides, some burning. Gunshots, shouts. The Blood Reapers caught between the Iron Wings pushing out from the front and the reinforcements hitting them from behind. And in the middle of it all, standing alone while his men fell around him, refusing to retreat, refusing to surrender, was Dominic Rourke. He stood in a pool of light cast by the headlight of his own motorcycle, firing at everything that moved, his face twisted into something barely recognizable as human. Jack walked toward him. His sides screamed with every step. His vision blurred at the edges. He could feel himself weakening, the blood loss pulling him toward the dark. But he kept walking. "Rourke!" Dominic spun. His gun came up. Jack was faster. His bullet caught Rourke in the shoulder, spinning him around like a top. Rourke's gun flew from his grip and clattered across the asphalt. Jack closed the distance, grabbed Rourke by the collar, pressed his own gun to the man's forehead. "It's over." Rourke laughed through bloody lips. "It's never over. Kill me and someone else will come. The Blood Reapers, don't forget. The Blood Reapers are done. Look around." Rourke looked at his men surrendering, hands up, dropping weapons, at the wing patches everywhere, a forest of leather and silver, at the distant wail of sirens. "No," he whispered. "This can't. Your father failed 45 years ago. Tonight, so did you." Jack leaned close. "The difference is you get to live with it." He pulled back his gun and brought it down hard on the side of Rourke's skull. Dominic Rourke crumpled to the dirt like a puppet with its strings cut. Behind him, Jack heard cheering. His brothers, the reinforcements, everyone celebrating a victory that had seemed impossible 30 minutes ago. But Jack couldn't celebrate because his legs were giving out, because the ground was rushing up to meet him, because the adrenaline that had kept him standing was evaporating and the pain was flooding in to replace it, a tidal wave of agony that turned the world white and then dark. The last thing he heard before the darkness swallowed him was a 7-year-old girl screaming his name. Rosie Callahan's scream tore through the chaos like a blade through silk. She had broken free the moment the gunfire stopped. Up the stairs, through the ruined clubhouse, past the shattered windows and the spent shell casings in the blood that painted the walls in dark, glistening streaks. Mama June reached for her, but the old woman was not fast enough. Rosie was too small, too quick, too desperate. She moved through the wreckage like water through rocks, finding gaps, slipping through spaces no adult could fit. She found him face down in the dirt 30 feet from the clubhouse door. Jack Brennan, president of the Iron Wings, the man who had promised, the man who had ridden to her grandmother's house without hesitation, The man who had faced down 60 armed killers and never once looked away. The man who had kissed the top of her head like she was his own. He was not moving. Rosie dropped to her knees beside him. The dirt was warm from the Texas heat and wet from his blood. She rolled him onto his back, straining with all her 7-year-old strength, and pressed her small hands against the wound in his side. Blood seeped through her fingers, warm and terrifying, and impossibly red in the moonlight. "Don't die." The words came out in a rhythm, desperate, almost mechanical, a prayer and a command, and a plea, but all compressed into 2 syllables. "Don't die. Don't die. Don't die. Please, God. Please don't take him too. I'll be good. I'll be good forever. I'll never complain about vegetables. I'll never talk back. Just don't take him, please." Bear reached her first. He collapsed beside her, his own wounded leg giving out, and pressed his larger hands over hers. Together their hands covered the wound. Together they held the life inside. "He's breathing, still breathing. We need a medic. Now." Someone was running. Someone was shouting. The world had dissolved into noise and movement, and the terrible stillness of Jack's face, which was the color of candle wax in the emergency lights. Margaret arrived, pushing through the crowd with an authority that parted bodies like a prow through water. She knelt beside her granddaughter, her trained eyes assessing what she saw with clinical precision honed in field hospitals decades ago. Entry wound, lower right abdomen. Significant blood loss. Skin ashen, breathing shallow but present, pulse thready. "He needs surgery immediately." "Chopper's 8 minutes out," Holt's voice said from somewhere behind them. She had emerged from the shadows, her face streaked with dirt, her tactical gear scuffed and torn. "Can he make it?" "I don't know." "Grandma." Rosie's voice was breaking apart like a ship on rocks. "Fix him, you're a nurse. Fix him. Please, hey." "Baby, I need you to keep your hands right where they are. Keep pressure on that wound. Don't let go. No matter what happens, no matter what you hear, don't let go." "I won't. I swear I won't." Margaret worked with hands that remembered skills she had not used in decades but had never forgotten. Hands that had packed wounds in muddy trenches. Hands that had held dying soldiers while helicopters were still 20 minutes away. Packing the wound with strips torn from her own cardigan. Applying pressure at the exact points where the arteries ran closest to the surface. Slowing what she could not stop. "Pulse is weak, but steady." She looked at Holt. "That helicopter better be the fastest one you've got." "It is." "Then it better fly faster." Jack's eyes fluttered. His lips moved, but no sound came out. His face was the color of old paper. Rosie leaned closer, so close she could feel his breath on her cheek. What are you saying?" His voice was barely a thread, a whisper you could only hear if your ear was next to his mouth. "Did we win?" "Yes." Tears streamed down her face, falling onto his chest. "You won. You saved Grandma. You saved all of us." "Good." His eyes drifted closed. "That's good. Stay awake. You promised you'd come back. You promised." A ghost of a smile crossed his lips, barely there, like a ripple on still water. "Bossy kid. I learned it from the best." The helicopter arrived in 7 minutes. Medical personnel in flight suits swarmed the area, loading Jack onto a stretcher with practiced efficiency. They moved fast, speaking in the coded shorthand of people who save lives against clocks. Rosie refused to release his hand. "I'm coming with him." "Sweetie, you can't." "I'm coming with him." Her voice left no room for negotiation. It was not a child's voice. It was the voice of someone who had already lost too much and would not lose again. "He saved my grandmother. I'm not leaving him alone." The paramedic looked at Margaret. Margaret looked at her granddaughter, 7 years old, covered in another person's blood, from elbows to fingertips, standing on feet that were still raw and bandaged from that barefoot run through Cedar Falls, and made her decision. Let her go. Someone should be with him. The helicopter lifted off with Rosie inside, her small hand still wrapped around Jack's larger one. The downdraft from the rotors flattened the grass and sent debris swirling. Margaret watched it disappear into the dark sky, watching until the navigation lights were indistinguishable from stars. And for the first time in 45 years, she let herself weep without restraint. Not for Thomas, not for Sarah, not for the decades of exile and silence. For a 7-year-old girl who had grown up too fast and a stranger who had become family in the space of a single impossible night. The battlefield quieted slowly the way a storm dies in fits and starts. Blood Reapers were loaded into federal vehicles, their hands zip-tied behind their backs. Wounded Iron Wings received medical attention from a fleet of ambulances that arrived in a steady stream. The reinforcements riders from clubs across Texas and Louisiana and Oklahoma clubs Margaret had helped over the decades stood guard, ensuring no one escaped. Holt approached Margaret with a tablet in her hand, the screen glowing blue in the pre-dawn darkness. Final count, 62 Blood Reapers in custody, 12 wounded, none killed. Rourke alive and unconscious, being transported to a federal detention center. And Bryce, arrested an hour ago at his home. He was shredding documents when our team breached the door. Found him on his knees next to a paper shredder that was smoking from overuse. He's already trying to negotiate a deal. Will you give him one? Not a chance. Holt's expression was stone, cold and flat and utterly without mercy. He protected the Blood Reapers for 20 years, fed them information, warned them about raids, blocked investigations. He's responsible for dozens of deaths directly and indirectly. She paused, her voice changed, became something softer and more terrible, including Sarah Callahan. Margaret felt the ground dissolve beneath her feet. The world tilted. The stars swam. What did you say? Bryce approved the operation personally. He signed off on it. He gave the order to make it look accidental. Your daughter was targeted deliberately. Rourke believed that killing Sarah would flush you out of hiding, that the grief would make you careless, that you would make a mistake that would lead them to your door. Strong arms caught her before she fell, bare. He had appeared from nowhere, moving on a wounded leg that should not have been able to carry his weight, let alone hers. His face was white with pain, but his grip was iron. Easy, I've got you. They murdered my baby. Margaret's voice was barely human. It came from a place below, language below thought, from the primal depth where a mother's grief lives. They murdered my Sarah to get to me. Yes. And Bryce knew. He authorized it. He signed a piece of paper, and my daughter died. Yes. Something inside Margaret Callahan broke open. Something she had been holding together for 2 years, with nothing but discipline and the stubborn refusal to look directly at it. She had known. In the deep animal part of her brain, she had known since the day she got the phone call. The brake failure was too convenient, the timing too precise, the dead mechanic too clean. She had known, and she had sealed that knowledge behind a wall of concrete and denial, because examining it would have destroyed her, because she could not protect Rosie from a wheelchair, because she could not fight a war from the floor of her closet. Now it was out. Now it was real. Now there was no wall left. Her daughter had not died in an accident. Her daughter had been murdered because of her. Bear drove her to the hospital through empty streets. The world outside the truck was silent, suspended, holding its breath. Margaret stared out the window, watching streetlights flash past like memories. She thought about Thomas, about the way he used to laugh, a full-body sound that came from his belly and shook his shoulders, about the way he held her after nightmares, his hand in her hair, whispering that everything would be okay. She thought about Sarah, about her first steps lurching across the kitchen floor with arms outstretched, about her first word, which was wing, because the patches were everywhere, about the woman she had become, strong, kind, a good mother, a good person. Gone. Both of them gone. Because of men who valued power over people, who valued legacy over life, who valued the completion of their ugly story over the existence of innocent human beings. You're thinking too loud, Bear said. How can you tell? Because you've got the same look Jack gets right before he does something monumentally stupid. Margaret almost smiled. What kind of look is that? Like you're planning to burn the whole world down and you're just deciding where to light the match. Maybe I am. Don't. Bear's voice was gentle but firm, the voice of a man who had walked through his own fire and come out the other side. You've won, Margaret. Rourke's going to prison. Bryce is going to prison. The Blood Reapers are finished. Burning it down won't bring them back. Thomas, Sarah, all those years. Nothing will. No, it won't. But you've still got Rosie. You've still got a life to live. And if tonight taught me anything, it's that there are a whole lot of people who care about what happens to you. Margaret looked at him, really looked at him. Why did you come when Jack called? When a stranger needed help? Why did you drop everything? Bear was quiet for a moment. The truck's tires hummed on the asphalt. Because that's what we do. That's what being an Iron Wing means. We protect people. We stand up when nobody else will. We don't ask questions first. We just show up, especially when it's dangerous, especially when it costs something. He turned off the engine in the hospital parking lot. You started something, Margaret, 45 years ago. You and Thomas built a family for people who had nobody. You gave us a code to live by, a purpose, a reason to believe we could use our strength for something good. And even though none of us knew you existed, we kept it alive, because it was worth keeping. They found Rosie in the surgical waiting room. She sat in a plastic chair much too big for her feet dangling above the floor. Her pink dress was destroyed, torn, bloody, covered in dirt. Her face was pale. Her eyes were red, but she was not crying. She was sitting perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on the surgery doors with the concentration of a sentry at her post. Grandma, she jumped up and ran to Margaret, hitting her with enough force to stagger the old woman. They won't tell me anything. They just keep saying he's in surgery and I have to wait. Then we wait together. Is he going to be okay? I don't know, baby, but he's strong and he's stubborn, and he has a lot to live for. They waited. Hours crawled past. Bear fell asleep in his chair, wounded leg propped on a magazine table, his snores filling the room like distant thunder. Margaret paced, back and forth, a track wearing into the linoleum. Rosie watched the surgery doors without blinking, as if she could see through them through sheer force of will. At 3 in the morning, a surgeon emerged, exhausted face, blood-spattered scrubs, gray hair escaping from beneath her surgical cap. Rosie was on her feet before the woman could speak. Is he okay? Is Jack okay? He's stable. We removed the bullet and repaired the internal damage. There was significant bleeding, but we were able to control it. The surgeon paused and something in her face softened. He's going to need several weeks of recovery, but barring complications, he should pull through. Rosie burst into tears, relief. Pure, unbearable relief, the kind that comes only after you have held yourself together past every reasonable breaking point and can finally let go. They followed the surgeon to a private room. Jack lay in the bed, pale and still connected to monitors that beeped a steady rhythm. Tubes ran from his arms to bags of fluid suspended above his bed. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. The larger-than-life biker reduced to what he actually was, a fragile human being, made of flesh and bone and blood that could be spilled. Rosie approached slowly, touched his hand. His fingers twitched at her touch, a reflex maybe, or something more. I knew you wouldn't die, she whispered. I knew it. Margaret stood in the doorway watching. This man, this stranger who had ridden to her rescue without a second thought, who had stood against an army, who had taken a bullet and kept fighting. Thomas would have loved him. Sarah would have trusted him, and Rosie had already claimed him as her own. Jack's eyes opened, slowly, painfully. His gaze was unfocused, swimming in a sea of morphine and exhaustion. The kid okay? Right here, Rosie said. I'm right here. His lips curved, almost a smile. Told you, Iron Wing material. He slept after that. Rosie curled up in a chair beside his bed, her hand reaching toward his even in sleep. Margaret watched the sun come up through the hospital window, painting the room gold, and let herself believe for the first time in 45 years that the worst was finally behind them. It wasn't. The phone call came at 9 in the morning. Holt's voice, tight, controlled, the voice of someone delivering news that could not be softened. Rourke escaped. Transport van was ambushed on the highway 30 miles east of Cedar Falls. 2 U.S. Marshals dead, 3 more wounded. Margaret felt the floor open beneath her. He has 6 men, a reserve unit. They were positioned along the highway waiting. This was planned as a contingency from the beginning. Holt paused. And Margaret, he took something from the evidence folder in the transport van, a photograph of Rosie. The world went white. How long? He could be anywhere. I'm mobilizing every available unit, but Margaret, he's not going to run. A man like Rourke doesn't retreat. He's coming for you. He's coming to finish it. Margaret ended the call, looked at Bear, who had jolted awake at the sound of her voice, looked at Rosie, who was standing by Jack's bed watching her grandmother, with an unblinking focus that missed nothing. "He's coming, isn't he?" Rosie said. Not a question. "Yes." "Then we don't run." Rosie stood up straight. Her voice was steady as stone. "You told me, Grandma, bad people don't stop until someone stops them." Margaret wanted to argue, wanted to bundle Rosie into a car and drive until Texas was a memory. But she looked at her granddaughter, 7 years old, wearing a blood-stained dress, feet still bandaged, standing straight as a soldier, and knew that running was over. It had been over from the moment Rosie walked barefoot into that garage. "Bear, get every iron wing in this hospital armed and in position. Now." They had 11 minutes, not 20. Jack forced himself upright in the hospital bed, tearing out his IV with a hiss of pain. The monitors screamed. A nurse rushed in. "Sir, you absolutely cannot. There's a killer coming to this hospital." Jack's voice was ragged, barely above a whisper, but his eyes were clear and hard. "You can help me walk out of here, or you can watch me crawl. Your choice." The nurse stared at him, at the blood seeping through his bandages, at the gray pallor of his skin, at the determination in his eyes that was not bravado, but something deeper and more dangerous. "I'll get a wheelchair." "I don't need—" "You'll take the wheelchair or I'll sedate you myself." The nurse's voice left no room for argument. "I've dealt with stubborn patients before. You're not special." Despite everything, despite the terror and the pain and the approaching violence, Rosie almost laughed. They moved as a unit through the hospital corridors. Jack in the wheelchair, Bear pushing, Margaret and Rosie in the center. The handful of iron wings who had stayed at the hospital formed a protective ring around them. Patients in wheelchairs stared. Nurses pressed themselves against walls. A doctor reached for a phone. Rourke came through the ambulance bay on the east side exactly as Margaret had predicted. Minimal security, emergency vehicles only. The one entrance nobody thought to guard heavily because only medical personnel used it. It was the tactical choice of a man who thought like a predator, always seeking the soft underbelly, always looking for the door that wasn't locked. The first sign was the absence of sound. The ambulance bay intercom went silent. The guard's radio stopped transmitting. Then Rourke's voice came through Bear's radio, calm and conversational, as if they were discussing dinner plans. "Hello, Margaret. I have to say I'm impressed. You survived longer than anyone I've ever hunted. Let me guess, you want me to walk out alone?" "I want you to watch. That's what I've always wanted. Your husband's face when my father raised the gun. Your daughter's face when the brakes failed and the car went through the guardrail. I collect those moments, Margaret. I replay them in the dark. They're all I have left of my father's legacy." The radio clicked off. They came fast. 6 men in black fanning through the emergency wing corridors with military precision, clearing rooms, checking corners, moving like shadows. Rourke at the center. His face was bruised from Jack's blow. His shoulder bandaged, his movement stiff with pain. But his eyes burned with a manic intensity that made him more dangerous wounded than whole. A cornered animal with nothing left to lose. Margaret met him in the hallway outside Jack's room. She stood alone. Behind her through the closed door, Rosie waited with Bear and Jack. Margaret had told them to stay inside, to protect Rosie at all costs. She had not told them what she planned to do. "There she is." Rourke's smile was a wound in his face. "The woman who destroyed my family." "Your family destroyed itself, Dominic, 45 years ago. One act of violence leading to another, an endless chain of suffering that your father forged and you're too blind to break. My father was a king. Your father was a kiln who died in a prison cell with nobody to mourn him. His last words were about a woman he couldn't kill and a mistake he couldn't undo. You don't have to follow him there. You can stop this. Right now, you can be the one who breaks the chain." "I don't plan to." His eyes moved past her to the door. "Where's the girl?" "You'll never touch her." Rourke raised his gun. His hand was steady. "I'll do whatever I want. And right now, what I want is for you to open that door." Margaret did not move. "Open it, or I shoot you and open it myself." "Then shoot me." The words came out calm, steady, the voice of a woman who had spent 45 years afraid and had finally completely run out of fear. Fear had been her companion for so long that its absence felt like weightlessness, like flying. Shoot me and take whatever satisfaction you can from it. But know this, every crime you've ever committed is documented. Every name, every dollar, every body buried in every shallow grave. The moment you pull that trigger, you seal your own coffin. And your father's legacy dies not with a bang, but with a whimper in a federal courtroom, read aloud by lawyers to a jury that will despise him. Rourke's hand trembled, just slightly. His men shifted behind him, exchanging glances. The door opened. Not Margaret, not Bear. Rosie Callahan walked out, 7 years old, pink dress ruined beyond recognition, feet still bandaged from yesterday's run, face streaked with dried tears and someone else's blood. She stepped past her grandmother and stood directly in front of Dominic Rourke, looking up at him from a height that barely reached his belt buckle, looking up at him with eyes that held no fear. Only a quiet, terrible understanding that came from a place no child should have to visit. You killed my mommy. Rourke blinked. Whatever he had expected, begging, screaming, a tactical assault, a trick, it was not this. Not a 7-year-old girl standing in front of him with dry eyes and a steady voice. You killed my mommy because you wanted to hurt my grandma. Because your daddy told you to. Because you don't know how to be anything except what he made you. Get back inside, little girl. No, Rosie's voice did not waver, did not crack, did not rise. I'm not scared of you anymore. I was scared today. I was scared when I ran to find the angels. I was scared when the shooting started. I was scared when Jack fell down and wouldn't move. But I'm not scared now, because you're just a sad man trying to make his dead father proud. And it will never work. No matter how many people you hurt, no matter how many families you destroy, he's gone. He can't see you. He can't hear you. And killing us won't change that. Nothing will. Rourke's face contorted. Something cracked behind his eyes. His gun swung toward Rosie. Margaret moved. 78 years old, combat trained, and faster than any of Rourke's men anticipated, because none of them had ever fought an enemy they underestimated this badly. Her hand caught his wrist and twisted, using his own momentum against him. Her knee drove into his stomach, folding him forward. Her elbow slammed into his throat with surgical precision, targeting the cluster of nerves that controlled balance and consciousness. Rourke staggered backward. His gun discharged into the ceiling. Plaster rained down like snow. And then Jack Brennan was there. He had torn through his stitches, left a trail of blood from the wheelchair to the door, his hospital gown soaked red. He caught Rourke's gun arm, the one Margaret had already weakened and wrenched. The sound of bone breaking was sharp and final. Rourke screamed. Jack drove him to the floor, knee on his chest, fist raised for the blow that would end it all. This is for everyone your family ever destroyed. Do it. Rourke's voice was a wheeze, air escaping through a damaged throat. Kill me. Prove you're no different than us. Jack's fist trembled in the air. He wanted it. God, he wanted it. Wanted to feel Rourke's skull give way beneath his knuckles. Wanted to watch the light leave those empty, evil eyes. Wanted to end the chain once and for all, not with justice, but with violence the old way, the only language men like Rourke understood. A small hand on his shoulder. Light as a bird landing. Don't. Rosie's voice calm as a lake at dawn. He wants you to kill him. He wants you to become like him. That's how he wins even from the floor. That's how the chain keeps going. He killed your mother, Rosie. I know. Tears ran freely down her face and she did not wipe them. But killing him won't bring her back. And Grandma always says strength protects and violence corrupts. I don't want you to be corrupted, Uncle Jack. Please, I need you. I need you to be the good man you are, not the thing he's trying to turn you into. Uncle Jack. The words hit him harder than any bullet, harder than the slug still healing in his side. He looked at this child, 7 years old, standing in a hospital corridor, surrounded by armed men and broken glass and the wreckage of a war that had been raging since before she was born, and choosing mercy, choosing light, choosing to break the chain that had bound two families in blood for nearly half a century. His fist lowered. You're not worth it, Jack said quietly. You're not worth losing my soul. He stood up, stepped back. Let go. Rourke lunged, one last desperate grab toward Rosie, one final act of violence from a man who had nothing else to offer the world. A gun cracked. Holt standing at the end of the quarter weapon drawn, stance perfect. The bullet caught Rourke in the thigh. He went down hard, screaming, clutching his leg. FBI agents swarmed from both directions, pouring through every entrance, pinning him to the floor, zip-tying his hands behind his back. This time, there would be no transport van, no highway, no reserve unit, no escape. Ever. It was over. Margaret pulled Rosie into her arms and held on like the world was ending and beginning at the same time. Like everything that had ever been lost was being returned in a single embrace. Baby, baby, are you okay? Did he hurt you? I'm fine, Grandma. Rosie's voice was muffled against Margaret's chest. I wasn't even scared. Well, maybe a little, but mostly I was angry. Is that okay to be angry? That's more than okay, baby. That's human. Jack swayed on his feet. Bear caught him before he hit the floor. Easy press, easy. Is everyone? Everyone's fine. It's done, really done this time. Jack's eyes found Margaret and Rosie still holding each other on the hospital floor. Grandmother and granddaughter. The founder and the future. Two ends of a line that had almost been broken and was now somehow stronger than it had ever been. He smiled. A real smile, tired and bloody and genuine. Then his eyes rolled back and he collapsed completely. Margaret didn't panic this time. She just sighed. Get him back to surgery. And this time, for the love of God, use stronger stitches. 3 days later, Holt brought a folder in the hospital cafeteria while Rosie was visiting Jack, who had woken up for good and was complaining about the food with the single-minded dedication of a man who planned to live a very long time. The investigation into Sarah's death is complete, Holt said. She set down 2 cups of coffee and slid the folder across the table. Full confessions from the men who carried out the hit. We know exactly what happened, who ordered it, and why. Margaret stared at the table, at the reflection of fluorescent lights in the laminated surface. Does knowing change anything? Maybe not, but there's something in here you need to see. She handed over the folder. Inside was a photograph, Sarah smiling, holding baby Rosie, both of them bathed in golden afternoon light, and clip into it a handwritten note on pale blue stationery. The handwriting was neat, careful, the penmanship of someone who wanted every word to be legible. Margaret's hands shook as she read. The letter was from Sarah, written 3 years before her death, never mailed. Mom, I know you're reading this someday. I figured it out years ago, the way you always watched from a distance. The way you moved every time something felt wrong. The old photographs I found in the attic when I was 15, the ones with the wing patches and the young woman who looked exactly like me. I'm not angry. I understand why you did what you did. You gave up everything to keep me safe, and I lived because of it. I had a good life, Mom. A really good life. I just want you to know that I love you. I'm proud of you. And I hope someday you'll come out of hiding and meet your granddaughter properly. She has your eyes, and I think she has your courage too. All my love, Sarah. Margaret broke. 45 years of walls came crashing down. 45 years of guilt and shame and sleepless nights and the constant gnawing question, did I do the right thing? Was it worth it? Did she hate me for being absent? Did she die thinking I didn't care? Her daughter had known. Her daughter had figured it out on her own. Her daughter had understood. Her daughter had loved her. Her daughter had been proud. She never sent it, Holt said softly. We think she was trying to find you herself. She wanted to tell you in person. She had started searching carefully, quietly, the way you taught her to do things without even knowing it. She never got the chance. No, but she died knowing who you were. She died proud of her mother. That matters, Margaret. In a world full of things that don't matter, that one does. Margaret clutched the letter to her chest, pressed it against her heart, and wept. And this time the tears were not only grief, they were release. 3 months later, the yellow house on Cedar Street was gone. Demolished by the damage from that terrible night, the walls too compromised to save the foundation cracked. In its place stood a new home built by Iron Wing's hands, over 6 weekends of labor paid for by donations from clubs across the country who had heard the story and wanted to be part of it. The house was white with blue shutters, and the porch wrapped around 3 sides, and there was a swing that hung from chains that did not squeak. Thomas Callahan's roses had been carefully transplanted to the new garden by Margaret herself, each bush dug up with surgical precision and replanted in soil she had enriched with her own compost. They bloomed brighter than ever, as if they knew that the shadow which had hung over this ground for 45 years had finally been lifted. Margaret stood on the front porch watching Rosie chase butterflies through the garden. The child moved with a lightness that had not been there 3 months ago, a freedom in her limbs, a joy in her laughter that spoke of nightmares that had finally stopped coming. Jack walked up behind her, slower than before, still healing a hand sometimes pressed to his side when he thought no one was watching, but stronger every day. "She looks happy," he said. "First time in 2 years. She stopped having nightmares last week, started sleeping through the night, started drawing pictures again. Butterflies and motorcycles and angels. That's a miracle. That's what family does." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the garden, watching the roses, watching the child who had brought them all together. Rosie spotted them and waved with both arms. "Grandma, Uncle Jack, come see what I found." They walked together through the garden, meeting Rosie at the edge of the rose bushes. She was crouched over something, her face bright with wonder. "Look." She opened her cupped hands. A caterpillar, green and gold, inched across her palm. "It's going to become a butterfly," she said. Margaret knelt beside him. "Do you know why caterpillars become butterflies? Because they grow. Because they transform. They go through something hard, something that changes them completely. They dissolve inside that cocoon. Everything they were breaks down into nothing. And from that nothing, something new emerges, something that can fly." Rosie considered this with the seriousness of a philosopher examining a fundamental truth. "Like us." Margaret's throat tightened. "Yes, baby, exactly like us." Rosie carried the caterpillar to a safe spot in the garden, setting it gently on a rose leaf and whispering encouragement about its future wings. That evening, at a full assembly of the Iron Wings, Jack presented Margaret with a certificate of recognition. Founder, lifetime honorary member, retroactive to 1979. "You built this family," he told her, 45 years ago in a garage with a leaking roof. "You and Thomas built something that outlasted everything the world threw at it. It outlasted murder and exile and corruption and war. It outlasted 45 years of silence. It's time you were part of it again." Margaret could not speak. For 45 years, she had been an outsider, a ghost, a memory that no one knew existed. Now she was home. Then Jack turned to Rosie. "Rosie Callahan, by unanimous vote of the membership, you are hereby named an honorary Iron Wing. All rights and privileges, full protection of the club, forever." He pulled a small patch from his pocket. Wings sized for a child, stitched in silver thread on black leather, identical to every other patch in the room, except smaller, except newer, except carrying a weight that had nothing to do with thread and everything to do with meaning. Rosie took it with trembling hands, held it like it was made of glass and starlight and everything sacred. "Thank you, Uncle Jack. You earned it, kid, every single stitch." She pinned it to her dress, a new dress, blue this time, with no tears and no blood, and ran to show everyone in the room. The cheering followed her like a wave. Margaret watched her go. The girl who had run barefoot through 6 blocks of Cedar Falls to find the angels. The girl who had pressed her small hands against a dying man's wound and refused to let go. The girl who had looked a killer in the eye and chosen mercy when every voice in the world would have understood rage. The girl who had broken the chain. Thomas would have been proud. Sarah was proud. The letter said so. And Margaret finally, completely, utterly was at peace. The Callahan Center opened 6 months later on a Saturday in spring. Rosie cut the ribbon with oversized scissors that she wielded with both hands in enormous concentration. Beside her stood Margaret, Jack, Bear, Mama June, and what seemed like every Iron Wing in the western United States. The crowd numbered over 200, club members, FBI agents, townspeople, reporters, and a small army of children who had been told they were about to meet someone special. The plaque beside the front door read, "Strength protects, violence corrupts. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's being afraid and protecting people anyway. Real power isn't making others scared of you. It's making others feel safe around you." And beneath the quote in smaller letters, written by Rosie Callahan, age 7. The first class of 20 children filed in that afternoon, ages 6 to 12, each with their own story of trauma and survival, each wearing the particular expression of a child who has been promised something and is afraid to believe it. Rosie stood before them, barely taller than most of them, and smiled. It was not a shy smile. It was the smile of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Welcome to the Callahan Center. I'm Rosie. I'm going to teach you how to be brave. A boy in the back raised his hand. How old are you? 8, but I've been brave longer than that. What makes you qualified? Rosie considered the question. She looked at the boy, at his defiant posture, at the fear beneath the defiance. 3 months ago, a bad man came to hurt my grandma. I was so scared I couldn't breathe. But I ran anyway. I ran barefoot through 6 blocks of my city until my feet bled. I found help, and together we stopped him. She looked at each child in turn. Being brave isn't about being big or strong or tough. It's about doing the right thing even when you're terrified. Every one of you has done that. Every one of you is already brave. You just don't know it yet. She smiled again. But you will, I promise. Margaret watched from the doorway. Jack stood beside her. Both of them were quiet for a long time. She's going to change the world, Jack said. She already has. Outside, the Texas sun beat down on the roses Thomas Callahan had planted 45 years ago. They bloomed in the heat like a promise kept, like evidence that beauty could survive anything, like proof that some things are stronger than the darkness that tries to destroy them. And somewhere, carried on the wind that swept across Cedar Falls, warm and steady and endless, there was a sound. Wings.